I'm Michelle Roberson. I am with Sierra Property Management. I'm also a lawyer and president of Sierra Property Group, Inc., which is our parent corporation. I'm going to be giving a presentation that I usually do. It usually takes about an hour. We're limited on time, so I'm going to condense it today. But I did print out all the slides for everybody. If you guys wanted to revisit anything that I kind of brush over, you guys can do that. And I'm going to be here afterwards if you wanted me to answer any questions. And just as a kind of a preamble, I refer to landlords and owners and any property managers in generally, I call them property providers. So if I say property provider, I just refer to all of those in general. A special note regarding anybody who has a voucher, they do have special additional rights afforded to them that I don't go into a lot of detail in them. So just know that if you are a voucher holder, you might have additional rights. And there are COVID-19 Tenant Protection Act that went into play. It did end technically in September 30th, but there are some that are still in play that go through the end of this month. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So just keep that in mind. So to start, I kind of broke this up as, what are tenants' rights and responsibilities as far as prior to move-in, during move-in, and, just the life of the lease, the life of the tenancy. So prior to move-in, the initial leasing process, what's the initial rights and responsibilities of all the parties? And the first is that everybody has a right to fair housing. And these three things are, I'm not going to get into it for timing purposes, but it basically says that nobody can discriminate against you based on, gender, what your family status is, whether you're a veteran, military status was added just last year, color, sex. So just keep that in mind when you're looking for housing. I've had people call our office and they tell me that they're looking for housing. Do you accept kids? And it's always shocking to me that people ask me if we accept children, because of course we do. You can't discriminate based on familial status. So, and the response that I get saying, I can't believe you're asking me that question, is no, actually people tell me they won't take a child. So that is actually a violation of your rights. So if you get something like that, know that it is a violation and you can report them, and there is a fair housing office, and make sure that that you're aware of that. And you can do a very easy Google search to find the fair housing office to be able to report that person. The qualification process is, because they can't discriminate against you, most property providers should have a very clear credit standard that's already in place. That way that they can have the same standard across everybody, and they shouldn't have a bias between one person and the next person. So if they have that already in place, they can't say, well, I like this person more than the next person, because they have a credit policy that they're going to apply with this person exactly the same that they're going to apply to the next person. So the other thing they have to do is they can't charge more than approximately $45 per application. A lot of people, what they do is they kind of sneak in additional fees during the application process, which they're not allowed to do. I say approximately $45 is because the law went into play around the 1980s, and it was a low number, and they allowed it to go up based on a CPI number. So based on that number, it goes up a little bit incrementally every year, and right now it's approximately $45. Property providers also can't make a security deposit non-refundable. So a lot of people say your security deposit includes a $350 non-refundable cleaning fee. Well, maybe Airbnb can do that in a short-term rental, but for your housing situation where you're going to live, it's absolutely not allowed. Every part of your security deposit is designed to be 100% refundable to you if you comply with returning the unit back to how it was when you got it, minus normal wear and tear. So the tenant responsibilities is you have to be honest in your application. So during this whole application process, if you hide that you have additional occupants in there and then you sign a lease and the occupants aren't in there, and the lease says only these occupants are allowed to be in there. As soon as you start that tenancy and you add people in there, you're now in violation of your lease. So that's your responsibility to make sure you're open and honest during that whole application process, because you don't want to be in violation as soon as you start that tenancy, because that could prejudice your living situation right off the bat. So now you're during the tenancy. What are your rights and responsibilities during the tenancy? And there's so many, and this is not all inclusive, but this is kind of touching upon as many as I could. Every lease has an implied warranty of habitability. So even though you walk in and they say, well, it doesn't have a heater, but that's okay, and your lease doesn't say anything about not having a heater, and not having a stove, and not having windows, it's implied that you have to have a habitable premises. They can't rent you a shed and you're okay with it. It's all implied in your agreement. So you have to definitely have the right to have a habitable premises, a roof that doesn't leak, heat, and a nice living conditions during the term of your agreement. You also have the right to privacy. A lot of property providers have this, sometimes they've lived in the home and they still think that it's their home because they own it. And they think they can walk in at any time, knock on your door and be like, hey, how's it going? Can I come in and check it out? It's no, you have the right to privacy. You're paying for your space. They can't just walk in and do a sudden visit for you. You have that right to say, actually, no, now's not a good time. And they can only go in for specific purposes. So, keep that in mind. There's a list here as to what those specific purposes are, and make sure that they give you proper notice. You can always agree and say, yeah, you can come in on this date for this specific reason. But if there's no real reason for them to continue going on and it's invading in your privacy, just say no. Hey, I'm sorry. You've been in here twice in the past month. I don't see any reason for you to keep coming in over and over again. It's now my space. It's my home. So, you do as a tenant have a right to your privacy. Now, you do have a responsibility, though. Now, we have residents that there's a necessary repair. It has to get done. There's a leak coming in, and they say, actually, I'm busy this week, and I really want to be home when you do the repair, and I don't want you in my house. You actually do have to let the landlord in to do a necessary repair. So if they give you notice and they post proper notice and it's a necessary repair and they need to do the repair, you do have to let them in to do that repair. So that is a responsibility that you have to give the landlord the opportunity to fix it. What ends up happening is that you don't allow them to do that. One, they can violate you because you didn't allow them with proper notice. But two, is it can dilapidate the property and become a bigger issue. So do know that they do have the right to go in for some repairs and maintenance. And if they give you proper notice, make sure you let them in. You have the right to reside in your property during the lease term. So usually when you sign a lease, and in City of Santa Barbara, they have to offer you at least a year if it's more than one unit, if it's more than a single family home. If you have a term lease, they can't ask you to leave during that term. You've signed a contract for a specific term. So I hear a lot that some landlords, you're in the 6-month period, they go and they're like, actually my brother's moving into town and I need the property back. And they're like, oh, well, we signed an agreement. They're like, yeah, but it's my family, so you got to go. They actually can't do that. They have to wait out the entire year. Some people are under the misconception that the property sells and all of a sudden the year doesn't matter anymore, that the contract it's done. And that's actually not true either. The person that buys a property buys it with that contract. So you do have the right to stay in your property during that duration of the lease. So sometimes people negotiate more than 1 year at the inception. They say, hey, actually, I really want to stay here 2 years. Can we negotiate 1 year and I'll increase the rent automatically for that second year to give more stability? And you can do that. For month-to-month tenancies, if you've been there for more than a year, they can't just give you notice to just leave. If you live on a multi-unit property, they actually have to have a reason to ask you to leave now as of 2020. And these are the reasons why. And when they do, they have to tell you why they're asking you to leave, and they actually have to pay you relocation. In the city of Santa Barbara, they have to pay you more than 1 month's rent. Outside the city of Santa Barbara, it's just 1 month's a relocation fee. So know that, and it's a very specific reason that they have to ask you to leave. And this only applies to specific units. So same with the rent raises. They can't raise your rent more than a certain amount in specific units. If it's single family homes are exempt, certain units are exempt, but for most multi-units, they can't raise your rents more than 5% plus CPI. This year, the CPI was 4%, so you're maxed out at 9%. Last year, the CPI was only 1%, so 6% was the increase. Most rents don't raise more than 3%, generally speaking, in this town, but that's where the rent raises are capped at. These are the tenancies that are exempt from the law. So I kind of touched on that. So most single family homes are kind of covered in the first. That includes condos. So anything that has their own APN. Tenancies that are under a year. So if you've only lived in your property for a year and you didn't sign a year lease, so make sure you're signing a year lease to protect yourself. Those are exempt, so that it allows somebody who just entered into a tenancy and they want to see if it works out. That's kind of how they negotiated that law, to be able to, exit a tenancy that they didn't think was going to work out. New housing that's 15 years or newer, and duplexes where one is owner occupied are exempt. And mobile homes and Section 8 housing, I think, is still exempt. There was some confusion on that. And then I touched on the relocation benefit. You do have the right to a relocation benefit if you're not exempt from this law. So make sure that you are paid that relocation benefit. There's 2 ways to pay it outside of the city of Santa Barbara. One is they have to pay it to you within 15 days of the notice, or 2, they tell you that they're going to pay it to you right after you vacate. So just make sure you know what the law is on that. Now, the tenant responsibilities here. You do have to still follow the rules. So you have to report maintenance issues and not commit waste. I kind of touched on that, like don't allow the roof to leak and let it become a bigger issue. Same thing with running water. Don't allow it to become a big issue, especially if you're not paying for water, and not report that. Comply with any laws that are going to impact housing. So don't make a mess. Don't have loud parties that are going to disrupt your neighbors. If there's a no smoking policy, don't smoke. Comply with the terms of the lease. Subletting's a big one, and it's a big issue right now with a lot of people that have moved out of homes and have moved into other homes. There's more people that are occupying units in secret. If your landlord finds out about that, it's a good reason for them to terminate your tenancy. So make sure you're not doing that. Non-payment of rent in the last year. Normally, it's a good reason for the landlord to terminate your lease. If you were not paying rent and it was a COVID reason, make sure you're signing the declaration and have submitted that to your landlord. So now if you're moving, what are your rights and responsibilities before you move? Now, before you move, the landlord can give you a 30-day notice, a 60-day notice, or a 90-day notice. 30-day notice is only if you've lived in the tenancy less than a year and you don't qualify for any of the 1482 that we talked about. You're in a single family home, you didn't live there for a year, and you don't have a lease. So they can give you a 30-day notice to leave for no reason at all. So just be aware of that. That's a good reason to get yourself a 1-year lease. It's a good reason to, be a good tenant and not get yourself vacated for any reason. A 60-day notice is required for any tenancy over a year and you're not on a lease term, because they still can terminate your tenancy for any of the reasons, even with relocation benefit. If they want to demolish the place, want to go out of business, they would have to give you a 60-day notice. And then a 90-day notice they would give you if you're on housing. And then they have a different cause reasons that they have to give you for a 90-day notice. Now, 3-day notices they have to give you if you violate any lease rules. So just keep that in mind. Don't violate any lease rules. If you have a subtenant, they give you a 3-day notice to pay or quit, then take that seriously and make sure you're, complying with getting rid of the violation and saying, hey, sorry, this didn't happen, and remedy it very quickly. So if you want to give a notice and you're not on a lease term, then generally speaking, you could give them a 30-day notice. So if you're month to month, you give them a 30-day notice. But make sure you're reviewing your lease, because some leases say that you can only give notice on the first of the month. So when your lease is going to renew, that's when you have to give the notice. Some leases and property providers are like, it's okay, give it to me on the 15th. That means you can move on the 15th. But if you have to give it on the 1st and you tell them on the 15th, then you're on the hook all the way until the 1st of the following month, not the month coming up. So you are still responsible for the rent during that whole period. Most leases say you cannot take the rent out of your security deposit because the security deposit is for any repairs. Now, you have a right to an initial inspection to be conducted before you move out. At the beginning, I had said that you have the right to your entire security deposit back. So there is nothing that is non-refundable in your security deposit. So that is what this initial inspection is designed for you to do, is to walk through the property with the landlord or the property provider, and for them to tell you what you can do to get 100% of your security deposit back. So that's why it's 15 days or less prior to your move out. A lot of our residents say to us, well, I'm gonna get all my stuff out, and can you just do the inspection after I give you the keys? It's like, you can do that, but then you're gonna be paying rent to remedy everything, because then you're gonna be doing work and you haven't given us the unit back. So then you have to make a decision. Are you going to be doing work in your property and paying rent while you do it after you're supposed to be moving out, or are you going to give possession back? So take advantage of that 15-day window beforehand as soon as possible, so that you have an idea of what's expected of you. The property provider is only supposed to tell you this is your right, and if you don't tell them, I want it, then they don't have to give it to you. So make sure that you tell them, yes, I want it. That way they give it to you. Otherwise, they've complied with what they had to do. And if you're moving out and you're like, hey, you never gave it to me, they're like, well, you never asked. That's where it lands. So take advantage of that once you know of it. Now, you need to give possession back to your property provider. This is kind of a term of art that people kind of have a hard time understanding, but it's like when you borrow a book, you give back the book. When you borrow a house, you can't really give back the house. So giving possession, giving the keys back is like a symbolic way of giving back the house. So a landlord can't go into your unit until they know you're giving them back that unit. If you say, I'm moving out 3 days from now, they're like, okay, great, let me know. And then you leave town and never let them know. They can't go in until they get that possession back. It's almost like saying, I'm going to give you back that book in 3 days. And the book is in the mail. They just don't know they got the book back. They just don't know. They can't do anything about it. So you're incurring rent until that property provider knows 100% that they got that unit back. So make sure you're crystal clear that you've given possession back. So the symbolic way is giving the keys back. Here are your keys. Thank you very much. Or send them an email, give it to them in writing. If you've left town and put it on the counter, make sure you have something in writing documenting you gave it back. Otherwise, the property provider has to post a notice that you've abandoned the property, wait the 15 days, track you down, and make sure they got it back. And you're incurring rent that entire time, because they really can't go in without, because it's not one of the reasons to go into your unit. So after moving out, your security deposit, you have a right to get your security deposit within 21 days. And if they're going to deduct anything from your security deposit over $125, they have to give you a receipt with it. So It's, if your security deposit was $1,000 and $300 was deducted, then it would be a $700 check with $300 worth of receipts attached to it. So everything has to be documented with it. So I'm going to skip over the COVID-19 stuff, and I'm going to give just a brief summary on it because I want to give Andrea some time. And I'm looking at our time where we've got 10 more minutes. But what I want to say about this is that during COVID-19, they call it the covered period. So all the rents that were due between March of 2020 and September of 2021 are the covered period. You had to have paid 25% of the rent due each month between September of 2020 and September of 2021. And if you did that, anything else that was owed, you will never get evicted. You cannot get evicted for that if you have turned in your declaration of COVID-19. So if you have that debt, you still owe the money, and hopefully you got some help, but you can never be evicted for that. So if you're still residing in that and your landlord's like, hey, you still owe me $10,000, what's going to happen? I'm going to evict you for that. No, you cannot get evicted for that past rent. However, you do have to pay your rent for October. So make sure when you pay your rent for October, you say, this is my October rent. Because if you don't pay October rent, they can evict you for not having your October rent paid in full. So that is really critical to know. The other thing is to make sure you get help. The gentleman that was here half an hour ago was talking about the rent relief that's still available through United Way. And I printed out a couple flyers with the information that's up here. And a lot of renters did get this help, and it's been phenomenal for them to get that assistance because they need it. A lot of people were not able to work. A lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of people were not able to expose themselves because of the pandemic. So it's been a very hard situation for everybody. But a lot of people did not go and seek out help because they were so overwhelmed with everything else happening in their lives that it was one more thing to add to their burden. So if you know anybody that's in that situation, encourage them. Like, hey, there's money available. Please seek help. It's no strings attached. They're not going to ask you for any, your immigration status. There's nothing attached to that at all. So encourage anybody who needs the rental assistance to seek out the rental assistance because it's really beneficial for them to not have that debt lingering for them. And then encourage them to pay their rent in full because right now is the time that they can be displaced for not paying their rent moving forward. And with that, I really want to introduce Andrea Buffano with the Rental Housing Mediation Program because all of these rules, it's good to know them, but it's also a different thing to experience them and not know how to respond to a property provider if you're a tenant. So having somebody like the mediation program to call and ask them for resources or assistance, like how do I handle this, is so important to have it in the community, and it's a free service. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Andrea and put her presentation up so she can talk a little bit more about the program.